You cannot park here. This space is for people like you." Javier's cold voice echoed through the underground parking lot in the Example neighborhood of Barcelona as he blocked the glass door with his body. Ricardo, sitting in his wheelchair, was immobilizing the adapted car that had cost so much to acquire. The eyes of the young wheelchair user, who at 28 years old had already overcome more struggles than most would overcome in a lifetime, met the gaze full of hatred from that 52-year-old man. But what Javier did not know was that at that very moment, a flower seller nearby had his phone in her hands, recording every second of this humiliation. 1 million people would come to witness this act of cruelty. 1 million people would come to know the story of a man who, even when knocked down, never fell. 1 million hearts would be touched by an act of love that would transcend human understanding itself. Now, dear viewer, who is following this story at this very moment, regardless of where you are watching, let me make a special request to you. If this story is touching your heart, if you feel something transcendental happening here, please subscribe to our channel. Press that red button that will change your entire life. Turn on notifications so that no story of overcoming and hope escapes your eyes. And please, leave a powerful like. That kind of like that comes from the soul, because the energy you send to this channel returns multiplied. Comment right now. From which city are you listening to this story? From which corner of the world are you connected with us at this moment? Ricardo was breathing deeply in that moment of confrontation. His lungs, which had already been tested beyond the limits of human resilience, were filling with the air charged with tension in that dark place. To understand who Ricardo had become on that day at the parking lot, we need to go back in time. We need to know the boy he was before destiny chose him for a test that few can endure. Ricardo was born in Barcelona, precisely in the Montjuic neighborhood, in a working-class, middle-class family. His father, Miguel, was a carpenter. His mother, Elena, was a nurse. Both worked tirelessly, not out of greed but out of necessity. Ricardo was the middle child of 3 children. He had an older brother, David, who at 30 was already successful as an engineer. He had a younger sister, Catalina, who at 22 was studying medicine, determined to follow in her mother's footsteps. Ricardo was always different from his siblings. While David was pragmatic and methodical, Ricardo was sensitive and intuitive. While Catalina was focused and disciplined, Ricardo was creative and spontaneous. His parents frequently joked that Ricardo had been given an old soul in a young body, that he had come into the world bringing with him a wisdom he had not acquired through years, but through past lives. In his teenage years, Ricardo stood out not for exceptional grades, but for his ability to connect with people. His classmates saw in him a presence that calmed, an energy that healed. When someone was sad, Ricardo knew exactly what to say. When someone was confused, Ricardo could bring clarity. His teachers frequently described him as a young man with an emotional maturity that went far beyond his years. At 18 years old, Ricardo had enrolled in a local university to study social psychology, not because he wanted to diagnose people or prescribe medicine, but because he felt a deep calling to understand the human mind, to help people overcome their traumas, to serve as an instrument of healing in the world. His parents were proud, his siblings were proud, and Ricardo was living what he believed was his purpose, helping other people find meaning in their existence. But the universe had other plans. The universe, in its infinite wisdom and sometimes cruel compassion, had decided that Ricardo needed a lesson that no university could teach, a lesson that transcended books and theories, a lesson that only pain, processed through faith and determination, can inscribe on the soul. It was a Tuesday night. Ricardo had just come out of a comparative social psychology class. He was driving his small car, a Seat Ibiza that he had bought with money he had saved during the summers working in an electronics store. The night was clear. The streets of Barcelona shone under the public lights. Ricardo was listening to music, that music that speaks of hope and renewal, and his heart was light. He never saw the truck coming. The truck, driven by a man who had fallen asleep at the wheel, invaded his lane in such a sudden, violent way that there was no time for any human reaction to avoid the impact. Ricardo's car was crushed as if it were made of paper. His body was thrown against the glass, against the metal, against the cruel reality that life can change in a millisecond. When he woke up in the hospital, Ricardo could not feel his legs. Initially, he thought it was numbness. He thought it was the natural result of spending hours on an emergency stretcher. But when the doctor, a 60-year-old man named Dr. Alvarez, sat beside him and had that conversation that would change his existence forever. The truth crystallized indelibly in his mind. "Ricardo," said Dr. Alvarez, his voice laden with professional compassion, "you suffered a spinal cord injury. Your spine was damaged at 3 points. We will do everything within our power, but I must be honest with you. It is unlikely that you will walk again." Ricardo heard the words, but did not believe them. Not completely. He believed there was still possibility for a miracle. He believed that with physical therapy, with determination, with faith in God, his body would relearn what it had done for 19 years. This hope was not naivety, it was faith. And faith, even if mistaken in its expectations, sustains a human being through impossibly dark periods. A year passed of hospitalizations, surgeries, physical therapy sessions that were so painful that Ricardo frequently cried as his body was manipulated, stretched, tortured in the name of recovery. But his body did not recover. His spine did not regenerate. And slowly, the truth began to penetrate his consciousness. He would not walk again. This was the new reality. This was the life God had chosen for him. If the car accident had broken his body, what came after broke something he considered far more important: his faith in his own family. When Ricardo returned home, in his adapted wheelchair, he hoped to find a home that would receive him with open arms. He hoped that his parents, who had raised him with love and dedication, would support him through this devastating transition. He hoped that his siblings would help him rebuild a life that had been destroyed. But fear is a powerful monster, and when fear touches the hearts of people, it transforms them into distorted versions of themselves. His father, Miguel, who had built his entire identity around being strong, working with his hands, doing physical things, could not bear to see his son in that condition. He could not process the idea that his son, who had inherited his strength and determination, was now trapped in a body that could not do what a body should do. Miguel began to drink. He began spending nights away from home. He began to disintegrate emotionally before Ricardo's eyes. His mother, Elena, who had dedicated her life to caring for people, could not bear the reality that she could not cure her own son. The frustration of being a nurse and knowing technically what needed to be done, but being powerless to actually solve the problem, consumed her. Elena developed depression. She would spend entire days lying in bed, without energy or will. His brother David, who had built his life around being successful, achieving goals, having control, could not look at Ricardo without seeing a reminder that not every problem has a solution, that not every difficulty can be solved through hard work and determination. David began to distance himself, looking for excuses to be away from home, and Catalina, his sister, the one he had always protected as children, who had admired her brother as a hero, could not bear the fall of her hero. The idolization transformed into resentment. How could her brother have been so careless and irresponsible driving that day? How could he have let this happen? 3 months after returning home, Ricardo had a conversation with his father that would mark him forever. "Son," said Miguel, his voice choked with drink and regret that could never be enough, I cannot look at you without feeling that I failed as a father. A father should protect his son. A father should have ensured you were safe. And here you are, and I cannot do anything to help." "Father," replied Ricardo, tears streaming down his face, "you did not fail. Life failed. Destiny failed. But you did not." But rational discourse could not penetrate the emotional pain his father was experiencing. Miguel would leave the house 2 months later, claiming he needed to find himself. He would return some years later, but would be a different man, someone who had been broken and who would never completely reassemble himself. His mother needed antidepressant medication and therapy. His sister stopped visiting. His brother moved to Madrid, arguing that he had gotten an irrefutable job offer. Ricardo was alone, not only physically trapped in a wheelchair, but emotionally isolated by the same family that should have sustained him. This was a bitter lesson. It was the understanding that life tests us not only through physical pain, but through emotional betrayals that cut deeper than any knife could cut. But here is where Ricardo's story begins to transcend the ordinary. Here is where his soul, that old soul his parents had recognized when he was a child, began to shine in a way that only extreme adversity can make shine. Ricardo could have given up. He could have followed his parents into a valley of shadow and depression. He could have allowed his family's rejection to destroy him, the same way his accidents had destroyed his body. But he did not. Because Ricardo had understood something that transcended intellectual understanding. He had viscerally understood that God does not make mistakes, that every trial serves a purpose, that every shadow in a person's life is there to teach something essential. Ricardo began attending a support group for people with disabilities. There he met other people who had experienced similar falls, people who had lost limbs in accidents, people who had been born with physical limitations, people who had learned, through years of struggle, that life is not what you can do with your body, but what you can do with your mind, your soul, and your spirit. One of these men, a veteran named Luis, who had lost his legs in an explosion while serving in the Portuguese army, took Ricardo under his wing mentally. Luis was 62 years old, a young wife of 48 years named Marta, and a philosophy of life that only those who had truly suffered can possess. "Listen to me, my young friend," said Luis during one of the group meetings, his voice a rumble of determination that had been forged in battles both internal and external. "You lost your legs, but you lost nothing. You only lost an illusion that your legs defined who you were. The truth is, you are much more than your limbs. You are a soul in a body, not a body containing a soul." These words, spoken by someone who had lived this reality for 43 years, penetrated Ricardo's consciousness in a way that no other words could have penetrated. Ricardo began training in adaptive martial arts. He began participating in adaptive sports competitions. He began volunteering in hospitals, helping other patients understand that life continued beyond the walls of their rehabilitation rooms. And while he was doing all this, Ricardo was transforming. Not back to who he had been before, because that person no longer existed, but into something new, something stronger, something that had been tested in fire and had emerged not merely intact, but refined, polished, transformed. At 28 years old, Ricardo had built a life that, when observed from the outside, might seem limited, but for him was absolutely full. He would wake up early, usually at 5:30 in the morning. His morning routine was ritualistically precise, not because he was obsessive, but because he had learned that structure was a way to honor his body, to demonstrate respect for the life that had been given to him. After waking up, Ricardo would spend 30 minutes in meditation. It was not meditation in the Eastern sense of mental emptiness, but in the Christian sense of contemplation. He connected with God. He spoke with the universe. He asked for strength for the day ahead. He asked that he could be an instrument of compassion for those he met. Next, he would brew his own coffee filtered fresh, made with attention, because Ricardo had learned that even the small rituals of daily life could be sacred when done with intention. While he drank his coffee, he read passages from the Bible, not because he was rigidly religious, but because he had found in sacred words a wisdom that anchored him in times of turbulence. In the mornings, Ricardo worked as a consultant psychologist for a non-profit organization that helped people with disabilities find employment. He did not earn much money, but he earned something far more valuable: the satisfaction of knowing he was changing lives, of knowing he was helping other people who had experienced traumas similar to his to find purpose again. In the afternoons, Ricardo attended his martial arts training. His instructor, a man named Rafael, who had lost the sight in both his eyes in a fire when he was a child, had developed a unique teaching system that allowed people with various types of disabilities to learn to defend themselves and, more importantly, to empower themselves. "The fight is not about defeating someone," Rafael used to say, his voice resonating through the training academy. "It is about defeating yourself. It is about proving to yourself that you are capable of more than society says you should be capable of." Ricardo trained 6 days a week. He had become so proficient that he had participated in international competitions. He had won medals. He had represented Spain. But for Ricardo, the real victory was not the medal hanging on his bedroom wall. It was the intimate understanding that his body, which had been broken, could be rebuilt, redirected, transformed into an instrument of strength. On weekends, Ricardo attended church with Luis and Marta, not because he was forced, but because he had discovered that the community of faith was a powerful antidote to the loneliness that occasionally visited him. And afterward, he frequently spent time helping other people, helping clean parks, visiting patients in hospitals, listening to the stories of people who, like him, were trying to find meaning in lives that had been altered by adversity. On that specific day, the day of the parking lot, Ricardo was simply trying to park his car in his reserved space. He was not looking for confrontation. He was not looking for drama. He was simply living his life, trying to exercise his rights that he had legally acquired as a person with a disability. But Javier was in his space. Javier had been a building manager for 10 years. He had built his identity around power. Power over the residents. Power over the rules. Power over deciding who did and did not do what. At 52 years old, he had become bitter. Life had disappointed him. His marriage had failed. His children rarely visited him. He had invested his time creating a reputation for authority, and all he had gained was loneliness and resentment. Javier saw people like Ricardo as an inconvenience. He saw reserved spaces for people with disabilities as a waste of space. He saw modern society as having lost rigor in trying to be politically correct. These ideas were not born from genuine critical thinking. They were born from years of hearing propaganda, consuming media that exploited fear and division, of allowing his own pain to transform into hatred, directed at those he perceived as weak or different. On that specific morning, Javier had parked his private car, that car that represented the only symbol of status he possessed in life, exactly in the middle of the reserved space, not by accident, but as a deliberate act of disobedience, as a manifestation of his refusal to respect the rules he considered unjust. When Ricardo arrived and tried to park in his space, Javier, seeing an opportunity to exercise power over someone he perceived as vulnerable, got out of his car and blocked the way. "Where do you think you are going?" asked Javier, his eyes seeking confrontation. "To my space," replied Ricardo, remaining absolutely calm. "That space is mine today. Find another place." This is how it began. But Ricardo, with all the wisdom he had accumulated through his years of struggle, understood something crucial at that moment. Javier was not really his enemy. Javier was a suffering man, a man who had allowed life to transform him into something small, and who now tried to feel big by diminishing others. Ricardo could have turned his car around and parked somewhere else. He would have avoided any conflict. He would have lived that day in peace. But Ricardo had learned over his 7 years living with disability that some battles need to be faced not because we are strong, but because someone needs to be strong. Sometimes confronting evil in a calm and non-violent way is an act of compassion. It is an opportunity to teach someone like Javier that hope still exists, that redemption still exists, that humanity still exists in this world. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" asked Ricardo, remaining absolutely calm, while his wheelchair was positioned strategically between Javier and the exit. "You need to use harsh words to feel superior, because deep down you know you are inferior. I lost my legs, but you lost your humanity a long time ago." The woman who was selling flowers, whose camera was capturing everything, felt her heart race. She had arrived at that parking lot by chance. She had lost her job as a literature teacher months ago. Selling flowers was a temporary way to survive while looking for a new job. Her name was Sophia, a 35-year-old woman with a heart as big as the universe. When she saw Javier approaching Ricardo aggressively, she instinctively began recording. What happened in the next few minutes would change the lives of everyone involved forever. Javier advanced toward Ricardo, his face red with fury, his fists clenched. But Ricardo, who had trained in adaptive martial arts for the last 7 years, anticipated every move. With a precision that demonstrated years of dedication, he maneuvered his wheelchair, moving with an agility that caught Javier completely by surprise. There was no violence, there was only strategy. There was only the intelligence of someone who knows their own limits and works within them. "If you touch me, there are cameras all over this place," said Ricardo with a supernatural calm. "And now there are witnesses." Javier froze. The anger within him began to transform into something different. Fear. For the first time in his life, that man who had spent decades intimidating weaker people was beginning to understand that he had encountered someone different, someone who could not be subdued, someone who was protected by something much greater than any physical force. He was protected by truth. "You are going to pay for this," threatened Javier, slowly backing away. "No, Javier, you are going to pay, because God sees everything. God sees every cruel word you have spoken. God sees every heart you have broken. And today, in just a few hours, 1 million people will also see." When Sophia posted that video to her social media channel, she had no idea she was feeding a fire that would burn Javier's reputation. She did not expect that video to be shared by local influencers. She did not know that within hours, Ricardo's story would spread like wildfire across the European internet. But there was something more than simple exposure. There was a deep lesson beginning to be woven, a lesson about redemption, a lesson about how the universe, when you are on the right side of history, conspires in your favor. When Ricardo got home that day, he found his phone buzzing incessantly. Messages from people all over Spain, from Portugal, from France, from Italy. People who had seen the video and were touched by his character, by his courage, by his refusal to surrender to cruelty. But among all those messages, there was one that would capture his particular attention. It was from Sofia. Not a message from a common admirer, but from someone who had recognized something in Ricardo that few can recognize, the presence of God in a human being. "Hello, Ricardo. My name is Sofia. I was the one who recorded the video. I did not do it to create drama. I did it because I saw in you something that needed to be seen. Do you want to have a coffee with me to talk?" Ricardo read that message 3 times. His heart raced in a way it had not raced in years. There was something in those words that transcended the ordinary. There was a sincerity that could not be disguised. There was the voice of someone who was tired of living an empty life and had recognized in a stranger, in a video of less than 5 minutes, the possibility of something transcendental. "Of course," replied Ricardo, typing with surprising speed. "Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon? At the cafe in Gaudi Square? Perfect. I am looking forward to it." That night, Ricardo did not sleep. It was not just anticipation. It was because something inside him had awakened. It was because God was orchestrating something that went far beyond human understanding. It was because in that story of humiliation and exposure, the universe was planting the seeds of a love that would be so powerful, so transcendental, that it would change not only their lives but would touch the hearts of millions of people. The next morning arrived with warm sun bathing the streets of Barcelona. Ricardo woke up early, took his shower carefully, prepared his wheelchair with precision and chose his clothes with attention. He was not just preparing for coffee, he was preparing for the meeting that would define the rest of his existence. Meanwhile, Sofia was equally nervous in her small apartment in the Gracia neighborhood. She was ironing her best dress, that blue dress her mother had given her when she was still a teacher. That dress that represented a version of her that had been buried by difficult life. That dress she was resurrecting that day because she felt something unusual, something only old souls can recognize, the presence of their complement. Sofia had faced her own tragedies. At 29 years old, she had lost her husband in a motorcycle accident. They had been married for only 3 years. She had cried so much that she thought her eyes would never produce tears again. She had asked God to take her too. She had wanted not to be here anymore, but God kept her alive for a reason. God knew that there would be a day when she would be in a parking lot selling flowers and would see a man who needed to be defended. God knew she would be there to witness a miracle. When Ricardo arrived at Gaudi Square, he saw Sofia sitting at a small metal table, her dark hair falling on her shoulders, her eyes searching for him with an intensity that crossed the distance. She stood up when she saw him approaching, and not in an exaggerated or dramatic way, but in a genuine way, in a way that only someone who understands true courtesy can do. "Ricardo," she said, and his name, when pronounced by her lips, sounded like music that had been composed centuries ago, waiting only for that moment to be played. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for defending me," replied Ricardo, and they both laughed, not nervously but genuinely, because they knew that the ordinary had been left behind. They sat down, ordered coffee, and began to talk. But it was not a common conversation. It was a dialogue of souls. Ricardo told about his accidents, about how he had lost his legs but found his soul. Sofia told about her husband, about how she thought her heart would never recover. But that video, that single moment of defending a stranger, had awakened something inside her that death had tried to kill. "You know," said Sofia, holding her coffee cup with both hands, "I did not buy flowers to sell. I bought flowers because I needed to believe there was still beauty in this world. Every flower I sold was a small victory against despair. When you confronted that man, you were not just defending your own dignity, you were defending the dignity of all of us who have been humiliated by people who do not understand compassion." Ricardo extended his hand across the table, and Sofia, without hesitation, extended hers. When their hands touched, it was as if the entire universe paused its movement, as if God himself held his breath, witnessing a moment that had been planned since before the world even existed. "Sophia," said Ricardo, his voice charged with an emotion that transcended language, "I believe there is reason in coincidences. I believe God places us in specific places at specific times so we can live specific stories. You were in that parking lot for a reason. I was in that parking lot for a reason. And now we are here together, and it is not coincidence. It is destiny." Sophia felt tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy from someone who finally understands that life, despite all the suffering it inflicts, also knows how to reward. It also knows how to heal. It also knows how to love. Dear viewer, who is following every word of this story in your city, in your home, at your work, leave a comment. If you are enjoying how this story is developing, write from which city you are listening to this narrative. If you believe life is still worth living, if you believe in the transformative power of love, comment right now. Your presence here, your attention at this moment, your energy being sent to this channel is blessing everything that is to come. Days transformed into weeks after that first meeting at Gaudi Square. Ricardo and Sophia found themselves drawn together in a way that defied explanation, as if two souls that had been separated across centuries had finally recognized each other. What began as coffee meetings evolved into long walks through the gardens of Barcelona, conversations that stretched into the early hours of morning, and a connection that seemed to deepen with every moment they shared together. They would sit on benches overlooking the city, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Ricardo would hold Sophia's hand, marveling at how something so simple could feel so profound. There were moments when Sophia would lean her head on Ricardo's shoulder, and he would close his eyes, overwhelmed by the gratitude that flooded through him. He had survived so much. He had endured so much darkness. And now, in this moment, with this extraordinary woman beside him, he finally understood why he had survived. Dear viewer, if you are still here with us, if you have made it this far into this story, I want you to know that what you are about to witness is love in its purest form. This is not the love you see in movies or read in romance novels. This is the love that emerges when two broken people decide to become whole together. This is the love that transforms not only the people experiencing it, but everyone around them. If you are enjoying this journey, if you feel your heart connecting with Ricardo and Sophia, please leave a comment from your city. Tell us where you are listening to this from. Your energy, your presence here with us, is becoming part of this story. Comment right now, do not wait. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. But love, real love, is never simple. Love is tested. Love is challenged. Love is forged in the fires of adversity until it becomes something unbreakable. And for Ricardo and Sophia, those fires were about to burn hotter than they had ever imagined. During their first month together, Ricardo discovered the depths of Sophia's compassion in ways that continued to astonish him. One evening, as they sat in her apartment, he noticed her staring at a photograph on her bookshelf. It was a wedding photo, her and her late husband Miguel on their wedding day, both of them radiant with joy, completely unaware that they had only 3 more years together. Ricardo watched her face as she looked at that image, and he saw the complex emotions playing across her features. He saw love, he saw loss, he saw acceptance. He saw the kind of wisdom that only comes from having your heart shattered and then choosing to let it heal. "Tell me about him," Ricardo said gently. "Tell me about your husband." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the photograph and held it close to her chest. "His name was Miguel," she said, and there was tenderness in her voice. "He was a poet. He wrote about ordinary things in extraordinary ways. He could write a poem about a coffee cup and make you understand the meaning of the entire universe. We met at university. I was studying literature, and he was in my poetry class. He wrote a poem about a woman who collected books, and I knew he was writing about me before he ever spoke to me. When he finally did speak to me, he said, 'I have been writing about you for weeks.' I could not help myself, and I told him, 'Keep writing, because I think I'm going to love you for a very long time.'" "What happened to him?" asked Ricardo. Though he already knew, he had read articles about Sophia's past after they first met. He had researched her because he wanted to understand the woman who had become his entire world. "An accident," said Sophia. "A motorcycle. He was riding home from a poetry reading. Someone ran a red light. He was gone in an instant. One moment he was alive, creating beauty with his words, and the next moment he was just gone. And I had to learn how to exist in a world that no longer contained him. How did you survive? Asked Ricardo. Honestly, I did not know how to survive at first, said Sophia. I did not want to survive. I wanted to follow him. But then something happened. I found out I was pregnant. I was going to have our child. And suddenly, surviving was no longer optional. I had to survive for this little being that was growing inside me. So I did. I survived. I gave birth to a daughter. I named her Rosa, after my mother. And then, when Rosa was 6 months old, I lost her too. She was born with a heart condition that the doctors could not fix. She lived for 6 months, and every day was a gift. And every day I held her, knowing it could be her last. Ricardo felt tears streaming down his face. He had not known this. He had researched Sophia's past, but he had not discovered this. She had lost not just her husband, but also her child. After Rosa died, continued Sophia, I wanted to die as well. I stood in that same place where I had stood after Miguel died. I stood at a window, and I thought about ending it. But then I remembered something. I remembered that Miguel wrote about ordinary things. And I thought, what if I spent the rest of my life doing what Miguel did? What if I spent my time seeing beauty in ordinary moments? What if I spent my time helping other people understand that their ordinary lives were extraordinary? So you started selling flowers, said Ricardo. I started selling flowers, agreed Sophia, because every flower is a small miracle. Every flower is proof that beauty emerges from dirt and rain and struggle. Every flower is a poem that Miguel would have written. And every time I sell a flower, every time someone smiles because they are holding something beautiful, I feel like I am continuing Miguel's work. I feel like I am continuing his legacy. Ricardo pulled Sophia close to him, and they held each other as the night deepened. He understood now why she had chosen to record that video in the parking lot. He understood why she had seen something in him worth defending, because Sophia understood suffering. She understood loss. She understood that sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is stand up for someone else's dignity, especially when no one is watching, or when you think no one is watching. 3 weeks into their relationship, Sophia had invited Ricardo to meet her extended family. This was a significant step, and Ricardo understood the weight of it. He was being invited not just into Sophia's apartment, but into her life, into the community of people who had supported her through her darkest times. The dinner was held at her cousin's house in the neighborhood of Sarria. Her cousin's name was Marta, and she was a woman in her late 40s with warm eyes and an embrace that felt like home. With Marta came her children, her husband, and a collection of relatives that seemed to multiply as the evening progressed. When Sophia introduced Ricardo to everyone, there was a palpable shift in the energy. Some of her relatives knew who he was. They had seen the video. They had followed the story. And now they were meeting him in person. This man who had captured the world's attention with his quiet dignity and his refusal to be diminished by cruelty. You are the one from the parking lot, said Marta, embracing Ricardo tightly. Thank God for Sophia. Thank God she was there to record that. Thank God that cruelty did not win that day. Throughout the dinner, Ricardo observed how Sophia interacted with her family. He saw her laugh with cousins she had grown up with. He saw her help serve food with grace and attention. He saw her comfort a young cousin who was going through a difficult breakup. And he understood more deeply that Sophia's capacity for love was not limited to him. It flowed through her like a river, touching everyone it encountered. She was the kind of person who made other people better, simply by being in their presence. After dinner, as everyone gathered in the living room, Marta's youngest son, a boy of 8 years old named Carlos, approached Ricardo. He had been shy all evening, observing from a distance. But now he came close and he asked, in the direct way that only children can ask, "Why are you in a wheelchair?" Ricardo smiled. "Because my body was broken in an accident," he said simply. "My legs do not work anymore, so I use this wheelchair to move around." "Does it hurt?" asked Carlos. "Sometimes," said Ricardo, "but not in the way you might think. The physical pain went away a long time ago. The pain that remains is the pain of learning that my life is not going to be what I thought it would be. But I have learned that sometimes, when life changes in ways we do not expect, we discover things about ourselves that we never would have discovered otherwise." "Like what?" asked Carlos. "Like strength," said Ricardo. "Like compassion. Like the understanding that other people matter more than our own comfort. Like the knowledge that love is more powerful than pain." Carlos thought about this for a moment, processing it in his 8-year-old way. Then he said, "I like you. I think you are good for Sofia. She has been sad for a long time, but since you came, she smiles more." Ricardo felt his heart expand. This child, who he had just met, had seen something true, had articulated something that Ricardo himself had been noticing. Sofia was healing, and he was healing. Together they were reconstructing each other. But love stories are not just about the lovers and their families. Love stories are about the moments when the universe conspires to make something beautiful happen. And one such moment came when, 2 months into their relationship, Ricardo received an invitation to speak at a conference on disability and accessibility in Madrid. The conference organizers wanted him to speak about his experience, about how he had transformed humiliation into purpose. Sofia insisted on coming with him. The night before the conference, they stayed in a hotel overlooking the Plaza Mayor. They could see the lights of the square from their window, and they stood together watching the city come alive in the evening. Ricardo held Sofia's hand, and he said something he had been gathering courage to say for weeks. "Sofia, I need to tell you something important. I need to tell you that I love you, not in the way that people say they love each other after a few months of dating, but in a way that feels like it goes deeper than time. It feels like I have always loved you. It feels like I was born loving you. It feels like my entire life, every trial, every moment of suffering, was preparing me to meet you and to love you in exactly this way." Sofia turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. "I love you too," she said, "and I know exactly what you mean. I feel like I have been waiting my entire life for you. I feel like Miguel, even in his death, was preparing me for you. Like he was teaching me how to love, how to see beauty, how to understand that love is more important than life itself." That night, in that hotel room overlooking Madrid, Ricardo and Sofia made love for the first time. It was not just physical. It was a sacred act, a merging of two souls that had been damaged and had healed each other. When they held each other afterward, when Ricardo whispered into Sofia's hair that she was his miracle, his reason for living, his redemption, Sofia understood that she had found something she thought she would never find again. She had found home. She had found belonging. She had found love. The next morning, Ricardo spoke at the conference. Over 800 people attended his presentation. People with disabilities, people without disabilities, people who worked in accessibility, people who were just seeking to understand. And Ricardo told his story. He told about the accident. He told about his family abandoning him. He told about the confrontation in the parking lot. But most importantly, he told about Sofia. He told about how love had healed him in ways that therapy and medication and physical rehabilitation never could. "I want you to understand something," Ricardo said to the assembled crowd, his voice resonating through the auditorium. "Disability is real. Limitation is real. Loss is real. But so is redemption. So is grace. So is love. And when you encounter love, when you meet a person who sees you not for what you cannot do but for who you are, everything changes. Everything becomes possible." When Ricardo finished speaking, the audience stood and applauded. People were crying. They were moved. And afterward, people came up to him and thanked him. They told him his story had changed their lives. They told him that they had been ready to give up, but his words had given them hope. They told him that they believed now that their suffering was not meaningless, that their struggles had purpose. But what Ricardo did not know was that someone in that audience was recording. Someone was capturing his speech and was planning to share it. And within 2 days, Ricardo's speech had gone viral. Millions of views, shared across social media platforms, trending globally. The video of a young man in a wheelchair speaking about love and redemption, about overcoming disability and tragedy, had reached people in countries Ricardo had never heard of, had touched hearts in ways that transcended language and culture. "This is the power of truth," said Sofia, when she saw how many people had watched the video. "This is what happens when you refuse to hide your pain, when you refuse to pretend everything is fine, when you tell the actual truth about your life. Other people recognize themselves in that truth. Other people understand that they are not alone." 3 weeks into their relationship, Sofia had invited Ricardo to her small apartment in the Grazia neighborhood for the first time. It was a modest space, filled with books and flowers, decorated with the kind of attention to detail that only a sensitive soul could create. On the walls hung photographs from her past, Pictures of her with her late husband Miguel, pictures of her parents, pictures of the life she had built before loss had come and deconstructed everything she thought she knew about permanence and security. There were also new photographs, recent photographs, photographs of her and Ricardo together, photographs of their first kiss, photographs of them laughing, photographs that showed that she was building a new life, not erasing her past, but integrating it with her present. Ricardo studied these photographs carefully, understanding that to love Sofia meant to love not only who she was now, but who she had been, and all the versions of herself that had been shaped by joy and tragedy. He understood that by accepting her past, by honoring her previous marriage and her lost child, he was honoring her. He was showing her that he did not want her to pretend her past did not exist. He wanted her to be whole, scars and all. That evening, as they sat together on her small balcony overlooking the quiet streets of Gracia, Sofia revealed something she had been carrying in her heart since the moment she saw Ricardo in that parking lot confrontation. "Tell me something, Ricardo," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "When you were going through everything, when your family abandoned you, when you lost your legs, did you ever think about ending it all? Did you ever think that death would be better than the pain you were experiencing?" Ricardo was quiet for a long moment. He understood what she was asking. He understood that Sofia was asking not out of curiosity, but out of recognition, because she had asked herself those same questions, because she had stood at that same precipice and looked into that same abyss. "Yes," he finally answered, his voice honest and unguarded. "I stood at a bathroom window on the 4th floor of a hospital, and I thought about how easy it would be to step out. I thought about how my family would probably feel relief when I was gone. I thought about how my pain would finally stop. I thought about all of those things. I stood on a bridge over the Turia garden," said Sofia, her own voice breaking. "I had a rope. I had written letters. I was ready. I was so ready to be done. And then I thought about Rosa. I thought about my daughter, who was only 6 months old, and I thought about what would happen to her if I was gone, and I put the rope down. I walked away. I went home, and I held my daughter, and I cried. I cried for all the pain I was carrying. I cried for all the love I had lost. I cried for all the dreams that had died." "Why did you not do it?" asked Ricardo, asking both about her suicidal moment and more broadly about how she had continued living after losing her daughter. "Because I heard a voice," Sofia answered, and she looked at Ricardo directly in his eyes. "Not a voice I could hear with my ears, but a voice I felt in my chest, in my soul. It was God telling me that my story was not finished. It was God telling me that I had not yet encountered the reason I was meant to live. And then years later I understood. That reason was waiting for me in a parking lot. That reason was a man who needed someone to see his dignity when others saw only disability. That reason was you." Ricardo took Sofia's hands in his. "You saved my life," she continued, "not because I was suicidal in that moment, but because you showed me that life is still worth living. You showed me that suffering can be transformed into compassion. You showed me that love can rise again, even after everything has been destroyed." Ricardo collapsed into Sofia's arms, and they held each other as the Barcelona night deepened around them. They cried together, mourning all the pain they had each carried alone. They cried for the losses they had endured. They cried for all the people who had abandoned them. They cried for their younger selves who had not believed they would survive. And when the tears finally ceased, they sat together in the silence, and something had shifted. In that moment, their love stopped being just something beautiful between two people and became something sacred, became something that felt like it was written in the stars, became something that felt like a redemption story that the entire universe had been waiting to tell. But fate, as it often does, decided to test them further. 1 week after that evening on the balcony, Ricardo received a phone call that would shake the foundation of everything he had been rebuilding. It was his father, Miguel. Ricardo had not spoken to his father in 3 years, not since Miguel had left, claiming he needed to find himself. The voice on the other end of the phone was weak, diminished, transformed by time and suffering into something almost unrecognizable. That phone call changed everything. "Ricardo, I am dying," Miguel said without any preamble. "The doctors tell me I have 3 months, maybe less. It is cancer, cancer of the liver. It has spread to other places. I did not want to call you. I did not want to burden you further. But I am old, and I am scared, and I need my son. Can you forgive me? Can you come see me?" Ricardo felt the world tilt beneath him. All the anger he had carried toward his father for abandoning him, All the resentment he had processed through years of therapy and meditation suddenly felt insignificant in the face of his father's mortality. "Yes," Ricardo said simply, "I am coming to see you. Tell me where you are." His father was in a hospital in Montjuic, in the neighborhood where Ricardo had been born. When Ricardo arrived, when he rolled into that hospital room, his father was sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at Barcelona sprawling below. Miguel had shrunk. The man who had built his identity around physical strength was now frail, thin, diminished by disease and regret into something almost unrecognizable. His skin was pale, almost translucent. His hair had fallen out from the chemotherapy treatments. His hands shook slightly as he reached for Ricardo. When Miguel saw Ricardo roll into the hospital room, he wept openly, his entire body shaking with sobs that came from the deepest places of his soul. All the walls that he had built, all the defenses he had constructed, crumbled in that instant. Ricardo saw his father, truly saw him perhaps for the first time. He saw a man who had been broken by failure, a man who had not known how to ask for help, a man who had tried to run from his pain instead of facing it. And Ricardo, with the compassion that only someone who has truly suffered can possess, felt his anger transform into something else. Compassion, forgiveness, love. "I failed you, Ricardo," Miguel said, his voice barely a whisper. "I failed you as a father. I failed you when you needed me most. I let my own weakness destroy what should have been my greatest strength, my relationship with my son. I am sorry. I am so sorry. If I could go back, if I could undo my cowardice, I would, but I cannot. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness and hope that it is not too late." "Father," Ricardo said, moving his wheelchair close to the hospital bed, "you did not fail me. You were broken, and I understand now that sometimes broken people break other people, not because they are evil, but because they do not know how to hold together the pieces of themselves, let alone the pieces of someone else. But I forgive you. I forgave you years ago, even though I told myself I had not, and I love you. That love never stopped, even when you were gone. My forgiveness was not dependent on you earning it. My love was not conditional. I have always loved you. I always will." Over the next 3 months, Ricardo spent every day with his father. He brought Sofia to meet Miguel, and something beautiful happened. As Miguel's body weakened, something inside him strengthened. He began to heal emotionally. He began to understand that redemption was possible even at the very end of life. He began to see in his son's love and in Sofia's compassion the proof that God forgives, that the universe rewards those who persevere, that love truly is the most powerful force in existence. Sofia would sit with Miguel, and she would tell him stories about books. She would tell him about literature and poetry, and the way that words could heal wounds. And Miguel would listen, and he would share his own stories. He would tell Ricardo and Sofia about the man he had been before fear had transformed him. He would talk about the dreams he had had for his life. He would talk about the mistakes he regretted. And through these conversations, through this honest sharing, something miraculous occurred. The estrangement began to heal. The years of silence began to be filled with words. The distance between father and son began to close. One afternoon, as Ricardo and Miguel sat together, Miguel took his son's hand and held it to his chest. "I can feel your love," said Miguel. "I can feel it healing me. Not my body. My body is too broken to be healed. But my soul is being healed by your love." "That is what love does," said Ricardo. "That is what love always does. It heals what is broken. It restores what has been lost, and it reminds us that we are never truly alone." Dear viewer, if you are still listening, if you are following this story to its conclusion, I want to tell you something. This is not just a story about a man and a woman who fell in love. This is a story about redemption. This is a story about healing. This is a story about how love can transform entire families, entire communities, entire worlds. If you are moved by what you are hearing, if your heart is touched, please leave a comment. Tell us where you are. Tell us if you believe in redemption. Tell us if you believe that love can heal anything. On Miguel's final day, as he lay in his hospital bed with only hours remaining, he called Ricardo and Sofia close to him. "I want you to get married," Miguel said, his voice still strong despite his failing body. "I want to know that my failure did not destroy the possibility of love in my son's life. I want to die knowing that something beautiful came from all of this pain. Promise me, Ricardo. Promise me you will marry this woman. Promise me that you will build a life with her. Promise me that my story, as broken and incomplete as it has been, will somehow contribute to the beauty of your story." Ricardo and Sofia exchanged a look, and in that moment, without any formal proposal, without any orchestrated moment, they both knew. They both understood that they were not just in love. They were meant to be together, forever. In the way that only people who have suffered understand forever. Forever was not a duration of time. Forever was a commitment. Forever was a choice that they would make every single day for the rest of their lives. "I promise, Father," said Ricardo, tears streaming down his face. "I promise I will marry her. I will build a beautiful life with her, and I will ensure that your legacy, the legacy of your pain and your redemption, lives on through the love that we create." Miguel died 2 days later, with his hand on Ricardo's shoulder and Sofia holding his other hand. His final words were not profound. His final words were simple. He said, "Thank you. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for showing me that love survives even the darkest failures. Thank you for giving me the chance to believe in redemption. Thank you for letting me die knowing that my son is going to be okay." And with those words, Miguel let go. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat faded. And he was gone. But his legacy remained. His legacy lived on in the love that Ricardo and Sofia shared. His legacy lived on in the fact that a broken family had found its way toward healing. His legacy lived on in the understanding that death is not the end of a story. Death is simply where one chapter closes and another opens. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. People came to honor Miguel, but more importantly, they came because word had spread about Ricardo's story, about the cadeirante, who had been humiliated in a parking lot and who had chosen compassion instead of revenge, about the woman who had documented that moment and had become his greatest love, about a family that had been broken and that was finding its way toward healing. Ricardo's brother David came from Madrid. He had left his job and his life there. He had decided that family was more important than career advancement. His sister Catalina came from her medical studies. She had taken a leave of absence from her program to be present for her family. His mother Elena came, and for the first time in years, the family stood together, united in grief, but also united in the understanding that they had been given a second chance. After the funeral, as people were paying their respects to the family, Ricardo noticed something. He noticed that Javier, the man who had humiliated him in the parking lot all those months ago, was standing at the back of the chapel. He was alone. He was quiet. He was observing everything without participating. Ricardo made a decision. He wheeled himself toward Javier, and he extended his hand. "Thank you for coming," Ricardo said to Javier. "I know this must be difficult for you. I know that my story has not been easy for you, but I am grateful that you are here." Javier looked at Ricardo's extended hand with confusion and then with recognition of what was being offered. It was not just a handshake. It was forgiveness. It was an invitation to be part of something greater. Javier took Ricardo's hand, and for the first time since that parking lot confrontation, he allowed himself to feel something other than resentment or fear. He allowed himself to feel hope. "I am sorry," Javier said, his voice breaking. "I am sorry for what I did to you. I am sorry for what I am. I cannot undo what I have done, but I can acknowledge it. I can take responsibility for it, and I can try to become a better person because of it." "You already have," said Ricardo, and he meant it. The fact that you are here, the fact that you are attempting to change, the fact that you recognize that your actions had consequences and that you want to be different, that is already transformation. After the funeral, Ricardo pulled Sofia aside in the chapel. "I know this is not the moment," he said, his eyes red from crying but burning with intention. "I know my father just died. I know we should probably wait, but I cannot wait anymore. I have waited my entire life to find someone like you. I have suffered, I have fallen, I have been broken, and it was all so that I would be ready for this moment. Sofia, will you marry me?" He did not have a ring. He did not have flowers. He did not have any of the things that society says you should have when you propose. All he had was his heart, laid bare, offered completely to the woman who had seen him at his most vulnerable and had chosen to love him anyway. All he had was the truth. All he had was the depth of his feeling articulated in a small chapel, in the immediate aftermath of his father's death, but also as a declaration that life continues, that love continues, that redemption continues. "Yes," whispered Sofia, pulling Ricardo into her arms. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. And she held him as he cried, not just tears of grief for his father, but also tears of joy for the future that was being born. The wedding was planned for 3 months later, in the spring, when Barcelona would be blooming with new life. The planning process became a form of healing for the entire family. Ricardo's mother became involved, and for the first time since his accident, Elena felt purposeful again. She began planning the details with a love and attention that showed she was finally ready to embrace the life her son had built. Catalina helped design the ceremony. She created a liturgy that honored both Ricardo's faith and Sofia's own spiritual journey. David helped organize the logistics. He researched accessibility requirements to ensure that the chapel could accommodate all of Ricardo's needs. The family, through this act of celebration and love, began to reconstruct itself. Sofia's family was equally involved. Her cousin Marta became deeply invested in the wedding planning. She helped Sofia choose her dress. She helped her plan the reception. She helped her process the complex emotions of marrying again, of honoring Miguel while also embracing a new love. Sofia's mother, who had been distant after her daughter's tragedies, finally began to re-engage with her daughter. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that her daughter's capacity to love again was not a betrayal of her first marriage. It was a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit. It was a statement that love is so powerful that even death cannot destroy it. Even loss cannot diminish it. But love stories are not just about the lovers. They are about the communities that witness them, that celebrate them, that are transformed by them. And Ricardo and Sofia's wedding became something far greater than a simple ceremony. It became a statement. It became a testimony. It became proof that love survives, that grace transforms, that redemption is always possible. 1 week before the wedding, Sofia received a visitor. It was Javier, the man who had humiliated Ricardo in the parking lot. He was not the same man who had blocked that space months ago. He was diminished, yes, but also somehow enlarged. His cruelty had been exposed. 1 million people had seen his true nature. He had lost his job as building manager. He had become something of a pariah in his community, but more importantly, he had been forced to confront the reality that his unkindness had consequences, that his hatred had ripple effects, that he was capable of something more than the bitter man he had chosen to become. He had begun therapy. He had begun to do the deep internal work necessary to transform his character. He had begun to understand that his cruelty came from a place of profound pain, that his resentment toward people with disabilities came from his own fear of becoming vulnerable, that his need to diminish others came from the fact that he had been diminished himself. "I came to apologize," Javier said to Sofia, his voice hoarse with emotion and humility. "I came to tell you that I'm sorry. I am sorry for what I did to Ricardo. I am sorry for what I am. I cannot undo what I have done, but I can acknowledge it. I can take responsibility for it, and I can try to become a better person because of it. I have joined a support group. I am working with a therapist to understand the roots of my anger. I am volunteering with an organization that helps people with disabilities find accessible housing. I am not doing this to gain forgiveness. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do, because I finally understand that we are all connected, that what I do to others I do to myself." Sofia, with a compassion that only someone who has truly suffered can possess, invited Javier inside. She offered him coffee. She listened to him. She did not judge him. She simply listened. And then she did something that shocked him completely. She invited him to the wedding. She told him that Ricardo had spoken about him, not with bitterness, but with a kind of sad understanding. That Ricardo had said that Javier was a man trapped by his own fear and pain, and that perhaps witnessing love might set him free. "I am not sure I deserve to be there," said Javier. "None of us deserve grace," replied Sofia. "But that is what grace is. That is what love is. It is undeserved. It is freely given. It is transformative. And I think you deserve to witness what love looks like when it chooses compassion over revenge, when it chooses to heal instead of to hurt." Javier came to the wedding. He sat in the back of the chapel, tears streaming down his face, witnessing a love story that had been born in some fundamental way from his own cruelty. As he watched, as he witnessed the absolute love between Ricardo and Sofia, something inside him cracked open. And when he saw Ricardo and Sofia exchange their vows, when he heard Ricardo say to Sofia, "You are my redemption, my purpose, my reason for surviving when survival seemed impossible," when he heard Sofia respond, "You are the second chance I thought the universe would never give me, but here you are, whole and true and real," something in Javier's chest broke open completely. Something that had been calcified by years of bitterness began to thaw. Something that had been dead began to come alive. And for the first time in decades, Javier felt the possibility of change, the possibility of transformation, the possibility of becoming human again. The ceremony itself was held in the Sagrada Familia Basilica, that magnificent monument to faith and human aspiration that Barcelona was famous for. It was a place of unfinished beauty, a cathedral that had been under construction for over 100 years, a structure that embodied the idea that transformation is ongoing, that perfection is a process, not a destination. Ricardo wore a suit tailored specifically to fit him in his wheelchair. The tailor had created something that made him look not accommodated, but celebrated. He looked powerful. He looked strong. He looked like a man who had conquered his own limitations and was ready to conquer the world. Sofia wore the dress her mother had worn at her own wedding, passed down through generations as a symbol of continuity and hope. It was a dress that had seen joy and sorrow, celebration and grief. It was a dress that carried within it the stories of all the women who had worn it, and now it would carry Sofia's story. Now it would carry the story of a woman who had loved, lost, despaired, and then found love again. When they exchanged rings, when they spoke their vows, when they kissed as husband and wife, there was not a dry eye in the chapel. People were openly weeping. They were witnessing not just a wedding, but a miracle. They were witnessing the triumph of love over adversity. They were witnessing the proof that redemption is real, that grace exists, that the human spirit, when supported by love, is capable of anything. But what made this ceremony unique, what made it transcendent, was that it was live-streamed. Not because they were seeking attention, but because they wanted to share this moment with the millions of people who had followed their story. Millions of people who had seen that video in the parking lot and who had been moved by Ricardo's refusal to be diminished. Millions of people who needed to see that love survives. That redemption is possible. That even when life breaks us, we can choose to become something beautiful. They wanted to give hope to people all over the world who were suffering. They wanted to say, if our love can survive this, then your love can survive anything. Over 1,500,000 people watched that wedding live, people from every continent, people who had no connection to Ricardo or Sofia, except for the connection that transcendent love creates. People of all faiths and no faith, people of all ages, people who watched and wept and left comments saying that they believed again, that they had hope again, that they understood that their own suffering was not meaningless, because if Ricardo could survive what he survived, if Sofia could love again after losing her husband and her child, then perhaps they too could find their way toward light. After the ceremony, at the reception held in a beautiful garden overlooking Barcelona, the energy was electric. People were dancing, people were celebrating, people were embracing Ricardo and Sofia and telling them how their love had changed their lives. And during the reception, something happened that no one had anticipated. David approached his brother. He tapped Ricardo on the shoulder, and when Ricardo turned, David was crying. "I am sorry," David said, his voice heavy with years of unspoken words. "I am sorry for abandoning you when you needed me most. I am sorry for being so caught up in my own need to be successful that I could not see your success. Success is not about career or money or status. Success is this. Success is love. Success is family. Success is becoming a person who can stand here and celebrate your brother's happiness without jealousy or resentment. I have been so focused on building my career that I forgot to build my character. I forgot to invest in the people who matter most. I forgot that the most important thing in life is not what you accomplish, but who you accomplish it with." Ricardo embraced his brother, and the two men held each other as if trying to make up for all the years they had lost. They held each other as brothers. They held each other as men who had been separated by pride and fear and misunderstanding, but who were now choosing to be connected by love. Catalina joined them, and then their mother Eleanor and the family, broken for so long, began its process of true healing. They stood together, all of them, holding each other, and they wept. They wept for all the pain they had endured. They wept for all the years they had lost. They wept for Miguel, who was not physically present but whose spirit seemed to hover over them, blessing them, celebrating with them. And they wept for joy, for the overwhelming joy of being reunited, for the overwhelming joy of being loved, for the overwhelming joy of having been given a second chance. Near the end of the reception, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ricardo wheeled himself close to Sofia. He took her hand, and they looked out over Barcelona together, a city that had tested them, challenged them, and ultimately become the setting for their love story. "Do you remember the first time I saw you in that parking lot?" Ricardo asked her. "I do not remember anything about that day except your face," replied Sofia. "When I saw you confronting that man, when I saw your refusal to be diminished by his cruelty, I felt something shift inside me. I felt like I was seeing God in human form. I felt like I had been waiting my entire life for that moment. I felt like the universe had orchestrated an encounter specifically designed to awaken my heart. And I felt like I had been waiting my entire life for you," said Ricardo, squeezing her hand. "I did not know it then. I thought my purpose was to help other people find meaning in their broken lives. But my real purpose was to find you, to love you, to spend the rest of my life showing you that you are worthy of love, that you are worthy of joy, that the pain you experienced was not the end of your story, but the beginning of your transformation. I thought I had survived my accidents and the abandonment of my family so that I could help others. But the truth is, I survived all of that so that I could be ready for you, so that I would have the capacity to love you the way you deserve to be loved." They sat together as the sun fully set and the stars began to emerge in the night sky. And in that moment, as they held each other, as they felt the Barcelona night wrap around them like a blessing, they understood something fundamental. They understood that love is not about perfection. Love is not about never being broken. Love is about choosing every single day to rebuild what has been broken. Love is about looking at another person's scars and saying, "Those do not make you less beautiful. Those make you beautiful because you survived. Those make you beautiful because you chose to transform your pain into wisdom. Those make you beautiful because you refuse to let your circumstances define your destiny." The video of their wedding, clips of their vows, footage of their first kiss as husband and wife, spread across the internet like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story. International media wanted to interview them. Suddenly, Ricardo and Sofia were not just a couple, they were symbols. They were living proof that the human spirit is resilient, that love transcends disability, that redemption is not just possible, it is inevitable when you choose to believe in it. They received interview requests from major television networks. They were invited to speak at conferences and universities. They were asked to write a book about their story. They were nominated for humanitarian awards. But through it all, Ricardo and Sofia remained grounded. They remained focused on what mattered: their love, their family, their community. A year after their wedding, Ricardo and Sofia received word that Javier had completely transformed his life. He had completed his therapy. He had become involved in advocacy work for people with disabilities. He had become a spokesperson for a major accessibility non-profit organization. He had become someone dedicated to undoing the harm he had caused, not through grandiose gestures, but through small, consistent acts of kindness. He had become a volunteer for a program that helped people with spinal cord injuries learn to adapt to their new lives. He had become proof that even the most bitter hearts can soften, even the most hardened souls can transform. He had written a letter to Ricardo and Sofia, apologizing again and thanking them for the grace they had extended to him. He had said that meeting them, witnessing their love, had saved his life, had given him a reason to change, had shown him that it was never too late to become a better person. But more importantly, for Ricardo and Sofia, their lives continued to deepen and expand. Sofia returned to teaching, but now she taught not just literature, but lived experience. She taught her students that books matter because they connect us to the stories of others. And when we understand other people's stories, we become capable of compassion. She taught them that suffering is universal, and that by understanding the suffering of others, we understand ourselves. She taught them that every person has a story worth telling, and that by telling our stories, we heal not just ourselves, but the world. Ricardo expanded his work, helping not just people with disabilities, but anyone who had experienced trauma, anyone who was struggling to find meaning in their suffering. He became a speaker. He became an advocate. He became a living testimony to the power of forgiveness and love. And 2 years after their wedding, on a spring morning in Barcelona, Sofia gave birth to their daughter. They named her Elena, after Ricardo's mother, and after the city that had witnessed their love story. Elena was born healthy and perfect, with 10 fingers and 10 toes, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's gentle spirit. When Ricardo held his daughter for the first time, when he looked into her eyes and saw the future, he wept. He wept because his daughter would never know suffering the way he had known it. She would be born into a world where her father had already fought the battles. She would be born into love. She would be born into hope. She would be born into the knowledge that she was deeply, profoundly loved. And he whispered to his daughter the same words that millions of people had heard him say throughout his journey, the same words that had transformed so many lives. He whispered, "God never makes mistakes. Every trial serves a purpose, and the only question you ever need to ask yourself is not why did this happen to me, but what am I going to do with what has been given to me?" And I am going to dedicate my life to making sure that you understand this truth, that you understand that your life matters, that you understand that your story has the power to change the world. As Elena grew, as she learned to walk and talk and navigate the world, she grew up surrounded by love. She grew up with a father who could not walk, but who had taught her that limitation does not define destiny. She grew up with a mother who had loved and lost and loved again, and who taught her that the human heart is capable of extraordinary resilience. She grew up with grandparents who had learned to forgive, who had learned to heal, who had learned to love more deeply. She grew up in a community that had learned through Ricardo and Sofia's example that compassion is a choice, that love is a decision, that redemption is always possible. 5 years after Ricardo and Sofia's wedding, they received an invitation. It was from Javier. He was getting married. He was marrying a woman he had met in therapy, a woman who worked with disabled people and who understood his past. He invited Ricardo and Sofia to the wedding, and they came. They sat in the chapel and they watched Javier get married, and as they watched, they understood that their forgiveness had borne fruit. Their compassion had not been wasted. Their love had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of others. Dear viewer, if you have listened to this entire story, if you have followed Ricardo and Sofia from that parking lot confrontation to their wedding day and beyond, if you have stayed with them through all their trials and triumphs, then you are now part of something sacred. You are part of a community that believes in love. You are part of a movement that understands that redemption is possible. You are part of a wave of humanity that refuses to accept that suffering is meaningless. You have become part of Ricardo and Sofia's story. So I want to ask you now, if you have made it to the end of this story, if your heart has been touched by what you have witnessed here, leave a comment. Tell me from which city you are listening. Tell me if you believe that love can survive anything. Tell me if you believe that God has a plan for your suffering. Tell me if you are ready to transform your pain into purpose, just like Ricardo and Sofia did. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. Your energy matters. Share this story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who is suffering. Share it with someone who has lost hope. Because stories like this are not meant to be kept to ourselves. Stories like this are meant to spread like light through darkness. They are meant to transform. They are meant to heal. They are meant to inspire people to become the best versions of themselves. They are meant to remind people that love is real, that grace is real, that redemption is real. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories coming. More stories of people who refuse to be destroyed by their circumstances. More stories of love triumphing over adversity. More stories of ordinary people becoming extraordinary through their faith and their determination. More stories of the triumph of the human spirit. More stories that will move you and transform you and remind you that life, despite all its suffering, is fundamentally beautiful. And remember this, above all else, remember that your story matters. Remember that your suffering is not meaningless. Remember that God is orchestrating something beautiful in your life right now, even if you cannot see it yet. Even if you are in the darkest part of your journey, the light is coming. Redemption is coming. Love is coming. It is coming for you. It is coming for everyone who is willing to believe. It is coming for everyone who is willing to choose love over fear. It is coming for everyone who is willing to transform their pain into purpose. This is the end of the story of Ricardo and Sofia, but it is also the beginning of your story. What will you do with it? How will you let this inspire you? What barriers will you break through? What love will you create? What purpose will you discover? The answer to those questions is what truly matters. The answer to those questions will define your life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing your heart to be touched by this journey. Thank you for becoming part of Ricardo and Sofia's story. I will see you in the next story, and the story after that, and the story after that, because there are always more stories to tell. There are always more hearts to touch. There are always more lives to transform. And I will be here, telling those stories, because I believe in the power of love. I believe in the power of redemption. I believe in the power of the human spirit to overcome anything. May you go forth from here transformed. May you go forth from here believing. May you go forth from here ready to love and be loved. May you go forth from here ready to transform your suffering into purpose. May you go forth from here ready to tell your own story, because your story matters. Your story has the power to change the world. This is Ricardo and Sofia's story, and now it is your story too. Thank you for listening.